Rain has a way of telling the truth. It taps the windows like a patient knock, reminding even the powerful that time still gets in. On nights like this, Chicago looks like it's holding its breath, alleys slicked black. Neon, bleeding into puddles. The whole city wearing a shine of secrets. Inside a private restaurant above Monroe, the quiet is thicker than velvet. The kind of quiet you only get when everyone present knows who sits at the head of the table. And what happens when he's displeased? Vincent Marlowe prefers the silence. It suits him. He learned a long time ago that men who shout are men who doubt. Vincent doesn't doubt. His empire is built on precision, the right number, the right word, the right pause. He understands that fear travels faster than bullets, and that most doors open for a gentleman who looks like he already owns the room. Tonight, like most nights, he does. On the table, a diet of agreements and half-truths served rare. He listens, tapping one finger against the stem of his glass, as his lieutenants lay out projections for the quarter distribution route. Truce rumors. A warehouse that needs new management. His expression is neutral, the kind of stillness that makes men talk more than they meant to. The restaurant staff glide through like curated ghosts. No clatter. Not conversation. Eyes down. Feet soft. The rain outside keeps the rhythm. The city keeps its distance. Vincent's associates speak in careful angles. They've seen him settle problems with nothing but timing, choosing when to stand, when to leave, when to say, "That won't do." He uses manners, like other men use knives. People say his calmness is his weapon. It is. It slices cleaner than any blade. He's about to render his verdict on a proposal for the South Side, when he feels the room shift something small and off-key beneath the polished hum of money and menace. It sneaks in with the draft under the door. Rides the shake of the building as a train mutters under the street. He doesn't acknowledge it. Not yet. Control is acknowledging only what you choose to acknowledge. He raises his eyes. The lieutenants fall silent. Every decision he makes is a stone thrown in deep water. The ripples touch everyone. We'll hold the southern lanes under the current arrangement, he says. I don't reward anxiety. Bring me numbers. Not feelings. There's a murmur of agreement. Relieved and obedient. He nods once. And with that nod, grants another week of peace to men who survive on borrowed time. The rain thickens. Somewhere below, a cab lays on its horn. Upstairs, the sound dies a foot from the door. The hush reforms like ice. Then the heavy oak swings wide. For a second, nobody fully understands what they're seeing. It's not a rival. Not a cop. Not a drunk who wandered where he shouldn't. It's a boy, small, bird-boned, soaking through a coat, 2 sizes, too big. Hair plastered to his forehead. Sneakers, leaving a trail of rain across a floor that costs more than rent in most neighborhoods. He looks 7, maybe 8, if life has been particularly generous. Which it hasn't. Please, he cries. Breath-cutting. Voice too clear for a room that expects only whispers. Somebody help me. My mum's hurt. And my sister's gone. The room reacts like a body that's been stabbed. Chair. Scrap. Hands go to jackets. One of Vincent's men is already moving quick. Smooth. Discreetly brutal when Vincent raises one finger. That's all. A single gesture. The man freezes mid-step. Like someone turned off gravity just for him. The boy keeps moving. Weaving past a waiter who's already considering the unemployment line. He doesn't stop until he's near the head of the table. Close enough to flinch. If Vincent stood. Which he doesn't. Please. The boy says again. The word landing. Somewhere between a command and a prayer. He's shivering so hard the syllable rattles in his chest. Vincent's associates are flicking glances like cards at the boy. At the door. At their boss's face. They're doing the math trap or tragedy. Vincent doesn't do math that way. He watches the boy's stance. The placement of his feet. The set of his jaw. Fear will fold you in half. Desperation holds you upright. This child is not bent. He's braced. Name. Vincent says. The word doesn't rise. Or fall. It sits there. Measured. The boy swallows. He holds up a soggy restaurant card. The ink running blue around the edges like bruised water. On the back. In a pencil scroll. Is a number that doesn't exist for most of the world. A line that rings in one phone. At one desk. And nowhere else. The room narrows. Vincent doesn't reach for the card. He doesn't need to. He knows the handwriting. He knows the lie embedded in the truth of it. Whoever sent this child knows him well enough to bet on his curiosity. Maybe on his conscience. If you believe he has one. People whisper about a young Vincent, who used to sleep in the back of a closed bakery. Who learned to talk like a lawyer, and fight like a dockhand. Who promised himself he would never again be small in a room of men. People whisper all sorts of things. The only one that matters now is that he recognizes hunger, when it looks him straight in the eye. What's your name, he asks. Ellie. The boy says. The E catches. The rest lands steady. They came to our apartment. They took my sister. Me mom, he blinks her. And for the first time, the child shows, through the soldier. She told me to find help. She told me to come here. She said this number was safe. Safe is not a word anyone uses for Vincent Marlowe. But it's the word Eli knows. And he's holding onto it like a rope over dark water. Vincent doesn't rush him. He doesn't fill the silence with assurances he can't yet offer. He lets the rain speak for a few seconds. Lets the room feel the weight of the moment. Lets his men feel the law he's about to lay down. If he helps the boy, he makes a public decision, in a private place. He invites chaos to sit in the chair next to control and ask for dessert. If he sends the boy away, he keeps the machine running, and loses something he won't admit was ever his. His finger stops tapping. He looks at the men who live by his words. He looks back at the child, who refuses to cry in front of strangers. He sees a hallway that smells like bleach. A door that locks too slow. A night when he was the one who needed a door to open, and it didn't. Everyone out. Vincent says, Chairas hesitatte. Eyes blow wide. There's a ripple of disbelief. Then a shuffle. Hurried and careful. Because no one wants to be the last man still seated when Vincent has spoken. The staff vanish first. Then the lieutenants slide their papers into folders. Gather coats. Fail to disguise their stares. The room empties like a lung exhaling. The rain sounds louder. As if the weather leaned in to listen. When the last of them is gone, Vincent gestures at a chair. A concession to comfort that looks almost ridiculous beneath the weight of what's happening. Ellie doesn't sit. He stands straight. Soaking and stubborn. Like sitting would cost him time. He can't afford. Start at the beginning. Vincent says. They came about an hour ago. Eli says. 2 men. One had a scar on his mouth that made him look like he was smiling, when he wasn't. They kept saying, a name Weston. My mum told them they had the wrong place. We've only been there 3 months. They didn't listen. They pushed her. She hit her head on the table. They took my sister. Lucy. She's 4. His lips press together until the color drains. She carried her magnifying glass. She likes to play detective. She says you can find anything if you ask the right questions. Eli opens his palm. The restaurant card sits there like a wet confession. My mum works nights at Mercy General. A man came in months ago. Scared and shaking. She helped him. He gave her this. Said, if trouble ever came, with his name on it, call the number, and someone would help. He looks up. This is the place on the card. And you answered when I said please. Vincent feels a small click somewhere inside him. Like a lock turning, not because a key was used, but because someone on the other side decided to open the door. Westin. The name isn't unfamiliar. An accountant with clever hands and bad judgment. A ghost who ran with maps in his head. The man had touched Vincent's world once. Barely. Like a moth to a flame. And then disappeared into the wind. If these men went to Eli's apartment looking for Westin's shadow, they dragged a child into a grown man's storm. Your mother, Vincent says. Where is she now? At the hospital. Eli says, I got her there. She told me to find help while the doctors were working. She said, Eli, if you ever loved me, run. So I ran. The line lands heavier than any plea. Vincent imagines a woman on a hallway floor. Blood pooling into the grooves of cheap linoleum. Breath thin and stubborn. Telling her son to become a lightning bolt. He doesn't allow himself to imagine what it felt like for the boy to leave her. There are some pictures you don't frame. You just turn them face down and keep walking. Is there anything your sister always keeps with her? Vincent asks. Anything we can find faster than a person? Eli nods. Quick. Grateful for a question he can answer without hurting. Her bear. Mr. Detective Bear. My mum sewed a tracker inside after he stops. Reorders. Continues. She worries. Of course she does. Worry is what good hearts do in bad neighborhoods. Vincent files the fact like a bead on a wire. Bear. Tracker. 4 years old. Magnifying glass. A scar that fakes a smile. Westin's name said out loud by men who should know better. He takes a breath. The next words are uncomplicated in shape. Impossible in consequence. We're going to your mother. He says. From there, we'll find your sister. Ellie doesn't move. As if he needs to confirm, what he heard isn't the kind of lie adults tell children to make them quiet. You'll help us. I'm not in the habit of repeating myself. Vincent says. And somehow it sounds kind. He reaches for his jacket. Not because he's cold, but because he's leaving. He pictures the stack of papers he planned to sign tonight. The calls scheduled. The machinery that churns when he turns the crank. It will all wait. Let it. Some nights are pivot points. If you try to treat them like any other, they break you later. He walks Eli toward the door. The boy leaves small dark footprints that look, in that moment, like a map leading out of the life Vincent ordered, and into the life he didn't know, was waiting. They stop at the threshold. Vincent glances back at the empty room, the abandoned negotiations, the half-finished meal, the chair at the head of the table, that suddenly looks lonelier than it's ever looked. Power is choosing the terms. Tonight, he chooses a child. Down the stairs, through the private exit, into the breath of rain. The night smells like metal and relief. Somewhere, a train shouts at the river, and the river shouts back. Vincent opens the car door. Eli climbs in with the seriousness of a soldier, boarding a transport. Vincent slides in beside him, and for a second, they sit in a quiet that belongs to no one else. Two people who were never supposed to meet, sharing a silence that feels like a contract. He studies the boy's profile. The way he stares straight ahead, like forward, is the only safe direction. He remembers being that sure about moving, and that unsure about everything else. Ellie. He says. What's the one thing your sister always notices? Eli blinks. Surprised by the question, and somehow steadied by it. Everything. He says. She notices everything. Good. Vincent says. And means it. Then she'll have left us something to find. He signals the driver. The city begins to slide past bridges and steam vents, and the solemn faces of buildings, pretending not to watch. Vincent takes out his phone. He makes 2 calls. In one, he says only a name and an address. In the other, he says, "Wake up the whole tree. I want ears near the docks, and eyes at Mercy General." He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The city shifts in response. Subtle, as a tide turning. Eli hugs his soaked coat to his chest and looks down at his hands. For the first time, the shake starts to fade. He allows himself one long breath, then another. Courage doesn't mean the fear disappears. It means the fear learns to share the room. Vincent watches the wet streets unravel like film. Each frame, building towards something he can't yet see. He used to think the past made you, then parked you. Later, he decided he was the one who did the making and the parking. Tonight, he's reminded of a third possibility. Sometimes the past sends a messenger through a heavy door, and the messenger is 7. And you answer because not answering would cost you something you couldn't get back. He looks at the boy. "We'll start at the hospital." He says, "Then we find your sister." Eli nods. Trusting the way. Only children and fools trust. Vincent doesn't feel insulted by the company. The car takes a corner, and the skyline rearranges itself into a promise. Behind them, a dining room cools around a vacant throne. Ahead, the night opens like a held breath, finally released. Vincent Marlowe, the cold king of Chicago, moves toward a story he didn't plan to enter, one written in rain and bright, stubborn hope. He doesn't know that this is the decision that will undo him and make him in the same breath. He just knows the boy beside him asked for help. And for once, help will mean more than a deal well struck. Rain keeps time on the roof. The city leans in to listen. And the man who built a life on precision lets instinct take the wheel. Everyone out. He'd said, "I'll handle this." He'd said, "He will. And nothing he rules will be the same again." Chicago after midnight wears its wounds in the open. The rain does not soften, it clarifies. It beads on ambulance lights and turns sirens into smeared ribbons. And if you listen closely, you can hear the city counting heartbeats. Vincent rides in the back seat with Eli. And the boy's silence is a taut wire. They cut through streets that know them both. The city knows Vincent by reputation. The boy by necessity. He is small in the leather seat. Fists balled in the sleeves of his coat. Eyes trained on the window as if the answer might write itself in the rain. Mercy General rises out of the wet, like a ship's hull. Grey and practical. Never pretty, and always ready. Inside, the air hums with fluorescent fatigue. Vincent moves through the corridors, as if they were his. A man who has learned to never look lost. Nurses clock him the way. Sailors clock storms. They don't name him. But they mark the shift in pressure. Eli is already a dozen steps ahead, following the smell of antiseptic and fear. Shoes squeaking punctuation points on waxed floors. Clara is pale against hospital linen. The colour of late winter. There's a split in her hairline and a stitched brightness there that shouldn't be. When she sees her son, strength like a last reserve, rushes up to meet him. She lifts her hand and it trembles. But it finds him anyway. Eli collapses into the touch like a door, finally unlocking. She whispers. And her voice rides the edges of breath. Men. Westin. Wrong apartment. Lucy. The words are stones, on a riverbed. And Vincent steps across them carefully. Westin is a name with a cold echo. A man who had once wandered too close to Vincent's ledgers. Clever enough to steal. Foolish enough to believe he could hide forever. Vincent can feel the logic assemble, with a cruel grace men searching for a ghost found a family instead. Clara's eyes find him. the stranger in a suit who arrived with her son. And there is the assessment of a professional who has seen every kind of trouble. She wants to ask who he is. Her body does not allow the luxury. Instead, she offers the only currency that matters. She hates the dark. Clara breathes. But she sings when she's scared. Vincent inclines his head once. A vow in the smallest motion. He has had entire treaties hang on less. He asks Eli about the bear. About the stitching. About the kind of tracker a worried mother can afford on a nurse's paycheck. The boy answers with crisp detail. He never says he's tier. He never asks what will happen if they're too late. He does not require the anesthetic of false hope. He requires a plan. Vincent steps into the corridor, and the hospital noise surges back. Fax machines chewing paper. Strangers calling first names, like prayers. Shoes whispering over tile. He dials one number for the man who can make a city's cameras wake up. Another for the one who can peel cell towers, like onions. He speaks in nouns without adjectives. Bear. Ping. Docks. All channel alert. He names streets. He hasn't driven in years. Remembers dead roots that came back to life when the money shifted. Instructs a dozen invisible hands to pull a single thread. When he returns to the room, Eli is standing sentry at the bedside table. Eyes fixed on the door, as if will alone could hold the world back. Vincent tells him what he has already arranged: eyes at the river. Ears on the scanners. A web strung from pole cameras to private feeds. Each silk strand humming for a tremor. He doesn't say the part that tastes like rust. Weston's mistake reached into this room. His machinery can reach out. 2. Sleep. Vincent says, "Eats and." Eli answers, "And it's not defiance. It's geometry. You can't ask the sun to set in the east. Then close your eyes." Vincent says, "You don't have to sleep to gather strength." He waits until the boy obeys. A small concession to gravity. Until the lashes lower, and the jaw unclenches by a single notch. "You've got the kind of courage most men never find." He adds, not as a compliment, but as a diagnosis. The boy breathes more slowly. Vincent sits in the plastic chair by the window and watches the city through glass, slick with rain. He thinks about a man he used to be. About the arithmetic of guilt. How much of a stranger's pain belongs to you? If your shadow made it possible. He has not entertained the question for years. Because questions that threaten to break your systems are luxuries for people with fewer systems to break. But tonight the equation refuses to leave the chalkboard. He finds a sum whether he wants it or not. His phone vibrates once. The tracker coughs into the dark and then goes quiet. A last flare somewhere along the riverfront. Enough. That one breath of signal is a spine to build a body on. The message is a set of coordinates and a building listed on tax rolls. As a seafood distributor that stopped distributing anything except rumors a decade ago. The docks receive a lot of secrets. They don't log them. He says. Eli's eyes open immediately. As if he never truly closed them. Vincent tells him what they have. Where they'll go. How soon. He asks a new question. Something that will sound like nothing to anyone else. And everything to a little girl. What does Lucy notice first? When she walks into a room, the things other people step over. Eli says. She calls them clues. Good. Vincent says again. And he means it more. He leaves the hospital with the boy's gaze on his back, and Clara's faltering pulse in his ear. As if the building itself has decided to wire him into their vital signs. Outside. The rain has thinned into mist that clings rather than strikes. The car tastes like leather and ozone. He makes one more call. No sirens. He says. No heroes. The perimeter holds. I'm going inside alone. The warehouse at the docks looks the way bad decisions look when they've had time to settle empty windows, like eyes that gave up blinking. Metal siding scarred with a history of hurried repairs. The river mouth is a wet throat swallowing moonlight. Somewhere inside, if the instruments can be trusted, a small heat signature exists among bigger ones. Vincent imagines Lucy's breath. The shape of it in the cold. The way a child makes herself small to fit a darkness she didn't choose. He steps through the unlocked door. No entourage. No show of force. Power is not the number of bodies behind you. It is the certainty with which you move forward. His footsteps are unhurried. The only rhythm in a building that had learned to tolerate silence a long time ago. He recognizes the first man who slides into view. Not because they've shaken hands, but because the world of debt and leverage has its own kind of school yearbook. A mouth scar. A smile that never keeps its promises. Evening. Vincent says, as if they had agreed on this hour, there's something here that belongs to me. The man with the scar tries on a sneer and finds it ill-fitting. We didn't know you were involved. He says, translation, we understood the rules, until you arrived, and changed the game. You didn't. Vincent agrees. Now you do. There is a conversation that men in their line of work are trained to have. It is all posture and threat. A language of knuckles, dressed in wit. Vincent does not choose that tongue tonight. He offers a precise exchange cash and consideration in return for a child who should never have figured in anyone's calculus. Compensation for the error. A promise of clean hands. A path to leave this building, unremarked. He offers payment. Leverage. Control. He offers everything except violence. It is not mercy. Mercy is a kindness gifted. This is geometry. Again, lines and angles that prevent blood from soaking into old wood, and never coming fully out. A beat stretches. In the pause, Vincent hears a thread of sound from above. Thin and determined. The kind of voice that survives, not by being louder, but by being more certain of its own tune. A song about explorers and maps and treasures, found by those who keep looking. The description Clara gave him, laid down like a breadcrumb trail, now sings itself into the room. He allows himself one breath of relief. He doesn't show. The scarred man's eyes flicker. He thinks about employers and reputations, and the cost of refusing the most dangerous version of the quietest man in the city. He nods toward the stairs. She goes first. Vincent says, and though his tone does not change, the air understands there is no other acceptable outcome. They bring Lucy down. And she is smaller than any of the lies told about her. A bundle of courage and wet curls. Clutching a plastic magnifying glass, like a knight might clutch a shield. She stops 2 steps from Vincent and studies him with the sober focus of a child who believes in evidence. Her eyes are not frightened. They are curious. Are you the smart man my brother said would come, she asks. As if they were meeting at a park, and not in the mouth of the city's machinery. I guess I had to be. Vincent says, dropping to one knee. So they occupy the same weather. For you, the building seems to relax around the exchange. Like an animal that recognizes, it won't be struck today. The scarred man shifts his weight. Not sure whether to be relieved or insulted by a negotiation that did not require him to show what he brought to the fight. Vincent stands. His hand steady, when the girl's small fingers find it. He does not look back as they move toward the door. He knows the reputation he leaves behind will do the staring for him, outside. The air feels cleaner than it has a right to. Rain mist coats Vincent's suit and Lucy's cheeks. And she grins up at the sky as if she's solved a private riddle. When he opens the car door, she pauses. Will my brother be mad? I didn't bring clues, she asks. You brought the best one. Vincent says, what's that you? In the seat. She tucks her knees under herself. Magnifying glass held like a compass. She begins to narrate, not because anyone asked, but because it is what she does. Small observations turned into meaning. The man with the funny walk, The way another kept saying the word docks like the word itself might unlock a door. The smell of fish that wasn't fish. The phone that rang and made everyone stand up straighter. Every detail settles into Vincent's mind, like a bead of mercury, finding its pool. The picture clarifies. Weston again. The ghost's fingers still on the scales. A contract that reached for one target and closed around a child instead. His fault. Not by deed but by design. A system built to profit from the world's cracks will always break the smallest feet first. The car glides back toward Mercy General. Lucy hums under her breath. The Explorer song lighter. Now that the dark is thinning, Vincent thinks of Eli in the waiting room. Eyes burning holes in the clock. He thinks of Clara. A woman who walked others out of suffering for a living, and found herself shoved into it anyway. He thinks about the men in the warehouse. How they weighed risk and respect, and decided, for once, that leaving with their bones intact was worth more than making a point. At the hospital, the hallway is a soft riot. Nurses who have learned to keep faces still can't help the cracks tonight. Ellie appears first. A bullet of motion that doesn't slow until he collides with his sister. Both of them folding and laughing and crying in a single indelicate knot. Clara lifts herself on a tide of relief and pain that any mother would surf without complaint. Vincent stands a few paces back. An intruder in a miracle. And he does not move closer. Some thresholds do not require his signature. Eli looks up at him over Lucy's shoulder. And in that look is the contract signed and sealed, not with ink, not with cash, but with the quiet exchange between two people who did not fail each other when the night asked. Vincent nods. And Eli understands it is an acknowledgement. Not ownership. The hospital swallows them into family. Vincent returns to the window and the city's wet lights. His phone purrs with messages. He does not open yet. The rescue is complete, in the way a story's first promise can be called complete. The child is safe. The sister can sleep. The mother's pulse steadies into something a nurse will log with a pen that finally stops shaking. And yet, he feels no clean finish. The track of guilt and responsibility keeps running past the edge of this chapter. Weston's ghost still leans over the map. The men at the docks will report to someone whose name matters. The bear's final ping sits in his chest like a seed. He knows it will grow into a tree of decisions he can no longer delay. The greater battle is not at the river. It is here. In the quiet, he is always guarded so well. Where the question waits, what kind of man does he intend to be? Now that he has proven he can be something else, Lucy's laughter bubbles down the corridor. Skylight bright. Ellie's voice follows. Low and proud. Vincent lets himself listen for a count of 10. Then he pulls the rein back over his shoulders like a coat and steps away from the window. The city, rearranged by a single choice, breathes in with him. Tonight, he did not start a war. He traded power for protection and discovered the exchange rate favors the soul. The rescue is real. The story is not done. Somewhere in him, an old engine stalls, and a new one catches. Quieter and harder to ignore, he heads toward it. Because forward is the only safe direction. And because a boy asked, and he answered. And because the truth of rain is that it always finds a way in. Chicago learns to breathe again in small ways. The weeks after the warehouse are a slow unwinding. A city loosening one knot at a time. In Mercy General, machines that once spoke in alarms settle into ordinary beeps. The color comes back to Clara's face, the way dawn comes to a winter window, hesitant. Then all at once, she walks before she should and laughs before she can believe it. When she thanks the nurses, they tell her it was good medicine. Inquiétez-vous. They admit it also felt like a miracle. Vincent arranges things the way he does most things, quietly, thoroughly. As if moving invisible furniture in a dark room until it feels right. The landlord, who can't seem to find the proper paperwork to evict the wrong people, suddenly discovers compassion and a better tenant elsewhere. A brownstone in a neighborhood with trees that actually keep their leaves is somehow available, and the rent is somehow manageable. A car idles on the corner most days. Not menacing, but present. The way a lighthouse is present, the grocery bill gets lighter, even as the pantry gets heavier. The hospital administrators, who once only knew Clara as a name on a schedule, now know her as the nurse who came back from a storm and brought good weather with her. They ask him why, not in dramatic confrontations, but in the soft ways people who've had enough of drama ask hard questions. Clara watches him in a hospital room that has finally run out of beeping and says, "You don't have to keep doing this." He answers with a shrug that looks like modesty and feels like surrender. He could say debt. He could say guilt. He could say strategy. None of those are true enough. He stays, because leaving would be the same as pretending the night at the restaurant never happened. There are some doors you can't close once you've seen who walked in through them. He starts missing meetings. Not the kind you can cancel with a text, but the kind where men build scaffolds of lies and balance their lives on them. At first, the absence is a rumor. Then it becomes a habit. He will be late. He tells his lieutenants, because there's a science fair project about magnets that needs a second set of eyes. He will reschedule. Because Sunday dinners have found him and claimed him the way a hymn claims a believer. He will take calls on the porch while Lucy explains her latest case, who took the last cookie, and why the clues were there the whole time, and Eli nods like a partner who understands that patience is the only weapon that always works. Sunday becomes a ritual. There's bread on the table, and laughter that sounds like a house, learning to trust its own beams. Clara tries to pay him back in dinners and scolding, and the stubborn independence that kept her family afloat when the world wanted to watch them drown. He accepts the dinners and the scolding. The independence, he recognizes, is the point. Sometimes, he sits with his jacket off, and his sleeves rolled, and he talks to the children, like they are new hires, in his most honest enterprise. He asks Eli to walk him through his reasoning. He asks Lucy to show how she spotted the single thread that didn't belong. They teach him as much as he teaches them. He doesn't say that out loud, but everyone at the table already knows. His lieutenants notice the drift before he names it. They are men who have learned to measure weather without instruments. They've sailed under his skies long enough to recognize when the wind has turned. In a side office built to muffle confessions, one finally speaks what the rest have been carrying. You've changed. Boss. You're protecting instead of controlling. Vincent does not deny it. He lets the words sit between them. Control was the religion. Protection might be the faith. He thinks about what those two verbs do to a person's spine. He thinks about how one requires tightening, and the other requires opening. He thinks about the kind of man who can do both, and decides that, for once, he wants to try. Word travels the way it always does, in a city that never forgot how to gossip. Rivals hear about the brownstone and the car on the corner. They hear about the nurse who lived, and the girl who sings, and the boy who looks older when he stands still. They hear that the man who never softened has softened in one direction and hardened in another. Curiosity dresses itself in opportunity. Old enemies. New players. Men who don't respect anything except a vacuum. They all circle. The way dogs circle a fence to test the boards. It starts with a shadow outside the school, where Eli learns equations that turn hard feelings into solvable shapes. Then it's a camera that doesn't belong on the block with the trees. Then it's a question asked in a bar, where answers are a currency, and truth evaporates like spilled beer. Someone is looking for the ghost again. Weston. Secrets. Ledgers. Numbers that can be used as knives. The circle tightens one notch at a time. The old Vincent would preempt with heat, make a public mess, send a message written in someone else's blood. The old Vincent would test the boards with his own hands and dare the dogs to bite, The man who now prefers Sunday dinners does a stranger thing. He calls a meeting. Not of his men. Not of his slice of the city. But of all the slices' names that own corners and alleys and dives and whole blocks of fear. They come because you don't ignore an invitation like this and live comfortably afterward. They come because he set the table and they are hungry. He does not bring maps with arrows. He does not bring photos in folders. He brings a proposition that sounds like blasphemy. In a room like this, stop pretending the storm isn't here. Stop swallowing the ocean and calling it rain. He lays out the reasons in paragraphs that feel like blueprints regulators with teeth. Numbers that are now too watched to keep pretending otherwise. Enemies who no longer play by the old rules. He suggests a conversion that isn't a sermon, but it might as well be legitimate fronts with legitimate backrooms. Real businesses. Investments that won't require deniability at every turn. A city where the underworld learns how to breathe above water, without choking on its own reflection. They jeer. They admire. They calculate. A few threaten by habit. He listens. The way he always has. And then he speaks in that quiet tone that changes the temperature of the air. I'm not expanding. He says. I'm not asking you to kneel. I'm telling you what I'm going to do with the piece that's mine. You can watch. Or you can walk with me. Either way. The ground is moving. Choose where you want to stand when it stops. It is, in its way, the most dangerous thing he's ever done. Not picking a fight, but refusing to be picked into one. He uses his power, not to widen a circle that has always been too tight, but to reinforce a fence around a yard that has started to feel like home. For the first time in a long time, he speaks not like a king, but like a man who understands that kings die and fathers live on in other people's stories. Clara hears about the meeting in fragments, whispers from nurses whose cousins know a guy. A newspaper line that almost says something. The way the neighborhood doesn't flinch as hard at night anymore. She doesn't care for the politics of it. She cares for the way his eyes look, a little more tired and a little more at peace. Still, there is a question she has held like a stone in her pocket. And on a Tuesday, that decides to behave like a Sunday. She finally takes it out and hands it to him. You could have walked away, she says. And the way she says it is not accusation, but curiosity. A woman trying to understand the thing that saved her family. Why stay? He could offer all the false wisdom's loyalty. Honor. Du diligence. He tries honesty instead. The kind he has not practiced out loud. Because your son walked into my world and saw something worth saving. There's a silence after that which feels like a new room opening. Not an argument. Not a surrender. A place where two people can stand without pretending. Clara looks at him like a nurse. Looks at a chart that finally explains the fever. Something in her shoulders lets go. It doesn't get cleaner after that. Not all at once. The city does not canonize him. The men who make their money in the dark do not suddenly find religion. There are still two calls that pull him from sleep, and Sundays that bruise into Mondays. There are compromises and calculations and the old habits that reach for him when he isn't paying attention. But the metric changes. The first question he asks himself is no longer, what does this buy? But who does this protect? The answers train him into a man he might have been, if the bakery had stayed open. If the door had locked quicker. If the city had let a boy be only a boy. He cannot go back and reroute those roads. He can lay new ones next to them. Months find their rhythm. The brownstone learns the weight of children's feet. The pace of returning steps. The geography of safe. Summer puts freckles on Lucy's nose and takes a sliver of Eli's guardedness. The car on the corner idles less and smiles more. The men who thought chaos was easy money discover that boredom is not something to fear when sleep is soft. Vincent learns to live with a phone that buzzes for reasons other than emergencies. He learns the names of teachers and the price of ballet shoes and how to tell a story with no guns in it that still gets a child to brush their teeth. On a mild afternoon, that the city offers, as an apology for its winters. Vincent stands on the back step of the brownstone and watches two children occupy a yard, as if they built it themselves. Eli has a book open, and his finger runs under the line, as if he can pull meaning up like a seam. Lucy prowls the grass with her magnifying glass raised, recording the flight paths of ants and the shadow language of leaves. Clara's laughter floats out of the kitchen, mixing with the smell of tomatoes and basil, and something sweet he doesn't have a name for yet. There is a softness to this scene that would have terrified him once. To care for anything in the open is to paint a target on it. But the thing about light is that it makes you visible to the people who want to keep you safe. 2. He has built a different kind of perimeter, not walls. Attention. Community. The unglamorous crew of neighbors who notice new cars and mothers who share soups, and the kind of law that doesn't need a badge to be obeyed. Lucy lifts her magnifying glass to the sky. The way a sailor lifts a sextant to read a future printed in light. The circle of glass catches a scrap of sun and throws it back. A small halo drifting between child and cloud. She announces the day's discovery in a voice that carries a ladybug with a missing spot. A neighbor's cat solving the problem of a fence. The way wind hides in leaves and only shows itself when you ask nicely. Vincent hears himself narrate, though he didn't mean to. It's a habit now, speaking the world into gentler shapes. The words come out of him like breath he's been saving. Sometimes, he says, barely louder than the rustle of trees. The smallest interruption can rewrite a lifetime. Clara steps beside him and bumps her shoulder against his. She doesn't answer with words. She doesn't need to. The yard answers for her, a brother, reading aloud to a sister who pretends not to need the help. A mother who no longer looks at the clock to measure the distance to morning. A man who has the look of someone who finally believes the night will not always require bargaining. He thinks of the boy in the restaurant, the way the rain wrote his name onto an expensive floor. He thinks of a card with a number that was supposed to be a last resort and became a first chapter. He thinks of the men who sat at his table and learned that fear travels fast, and wonders if love travels faster when you give it a lane. He thinks of the meeting where he told an old world to learn new tricks or swallow its tongue. He thinks of how he still could fail, still could reach for the wrong lever on a day when the right one is hidden. He thinks of how redemption is not a moment, but a maintenance plan. The light softens. The day folds itself like linen. Piano notes, the careful, unshowy kind, seem to thread through the open windows from someone's radio down the block. He feels grateful for a music he didn't put on, and a peace he didn't extort. He wonders if grace is just what you call it when life refuses to keep punishing you once you've finally stopped volunteering. Lucy lowers the magnifying glass and points it at him as if certifying a clue. You look different, she announces. How so, he asks. Like you found something you were looking for, she says, and goes back to hunting ants, as if she hadn't just solved a case bigger than any he's ever worked. He thinks of an answer and leaves it unsaid. Some cases are better closed in the heart than out loud. Instead, he reaches for the thought. He wants the world to remember, if it ever puts him on trial, for trying to be better than he was. Power, he has learned, is the loudest promise in the room, until compassion walks in. Then it's just an echo. When the story of this year is told by neighbors at a grill, by nurses at a station, by kids at a sleepover, by men who used to trade in fear and now trade in something closer to pride, it will sound simple, because truth does that, when you give it enough time. A child asked. A man answered. And the city that had taught them both to be hard learned, just for a stretch of seasons, how to be kind. The yard darkens by half a tone. The lights inside the house come up. Warm and ordinary. He turns to go in, to wash up, to sit at a table and listen to a family argue about nothing, in a way that means everything. Behind him, The last of the day slides over Chicago like a hand, smoothing a wrinkle from a clean sheet. Power means nothing without compassion. It is a sentence that could live on a wall or in a whisper. Tonight, it is enough that it lives inside him. Steady as a pulse. Quiet as a promise he intends to keep. If this story moved you, take a moment before you leave. Hit the like button, it tells us these stories matter. Subscribe, and turn on the little bell, so you'll never miss the next tale of courage, compassion, and second chances. And in the comments below, tell us what part of Vincent's journey spoke to you the most. Your words, your thoughts, they help this channel grow and help more people find stories that remind us all it's never too late to change. Thank you for watching. Until next time, take care of each other.